On April the 11th, 1986, the deadliest shootout in FBI history would take place. In the course of 5 minutes, over 140 shots would be fired, 4 people would be dead, and law enforcement would be changed forever. Hello everybody. Today we will be talking about the 1986 Miami-Dade shootout. Now the part everyone remembers about this case is the shootout itself, and don't worry, we're going to get to that. But to set the stage for how the situation became as devastating as it did, we need to talk about the perpetrators and the series of crimes they committed that led up to this fateful moment. Thankfully, this is one of the most well-documented cases in FBI history, and there are, with no exaggeration, thousands of articles and journals that have been written about this event. And my personal favorite source for it that I highly recommend is a book called FBI Miami Firefight: 5 Minutes That Changed the Bureau, which was written by Ed Morales, one of the officers who we're going to talk about in this story. Also, because it's such a popular story, sometimes a game of telephone happens and bad data will get passed down a chain of information forever. So if there's any contradictory points in the story or like disagreement between dates, I tried to just go off what the FBI said, but sometimes even the FBI in the same report will give 2 different dates for the same thing that happened. So I just always defaulted to whatever Ed said because, you know, he was there. And if the guy who was there wants to be wrong about it, that's fine by me. There are so many interesting legs to this story, from reopening cold cases to decades of data and testing and arguments that are still persistent about calibers and how police should approach suspects and things like that. It is by far one of the most influential events in law enforcement history, and I'm excited to talk about it. However, this being YouTube, and because we're going to be talking about things that... actually, hold on, let me put on my disguise 1 second. Okay. All right, yeah. Since we're going to be talking about things that go boom and people being shot and whatnot, I'm very thankful for the sponsor of today's video because it's really cool to get paid for doing work, if you could call all of this that. Because if there's one thing that YouTubers get way too caught up on, it's money. And as someone who likes to keep their money, I know how frustrating it can be to have trouble setting budgets or to have a bunch of unneeded subscriptions that you don't even realize you were paying for. But that's where today's sponsor, Rocket Money, is here to help. Rocket Money is an all-in-one personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower your bills, and manage your money better. With Rocket Money, you can create a customized budget in seconds. And from there, you can get updates to keep track of your spending all the way down to specific spending categories. Rocket Money places all of your subscriptions into a single list. And if you see something that you don't want to pay for anymore, in just a few steps, Rocket Money can cancel that subscription for you. Rocket Money can even help you lower your bills. That is right, with just a couple of taps, Rocket Money can help negotiate your bills from internet service providers to phone bills. And from there, Rocket Money can negotiate your rates on your behalf. Rocket Money has helped save its customers up to $740 a year when they use all of Rocket Money's premium features, and have helped save their customers $500 million in canceled subscriptions. So start being smart with your money and get a hold of Rocket Money today, because right now there's never been a better time to get in on this offer. That's because right now, if you head to the link in the description at rocketmoney.com/Wendigoon, you'll be able to get started with Rocket Money for free. That is right, for free. From there, you can unlock even more features with premium, but for now, you can just try out the app and see if it's right for you and join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. Again, that is rocketmoney.com/Wendigoon to get started for free today. Thank you all so much for watching the ad, and thank you so much to Rocket Money for sponsoring this video. It really does mean the most. Hope you all check them out. Link is in the description, and we are back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. There's a lot of angles you could take this case, but to make it the most interesting, why don't we start at the beginning? And in this story, that's our suspects. Those suspects being Michael Lee Platt and William Russell Maddox. Platt and Maddox seemed to live a rather uninteresting life until they met each other sometime in the 1970s. Maddox was a former Marine cook who would later enlist in the Army and become a military police officer. And Platt enlisted in the Army, went to air assault school, and then also became a military police officer. Sometime after 1973, both of the men were stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. It was after getting out of the military that both of the men's lives would take very brutal and suspicious turns. In December of 1983, Maddox and his wife were living near Columbus, Ohio. It was in Columbus, Ohio that Maddox's wife, Patty, worked as a cancer research doctor at the Methodist Hospital. Well, on December 30th of 1983, Maddox's wife and her co-worker were found tied up with their mouths gagged and their throats slit. Both of them were murdered at work, and to this day, the case remains unsolved. The same day this happened, Maddox's father suffered a stroke, more than likely at the news of what happened to his daughter-in-law, and his father would need constant care for his health until his death a few months later. Over the course of this, people around Maddox said that he had a religious awakening and became a diehard Christian and member of his church, while also, unbeknownst to most people, was the prime suspect in his wife's murder. Now again, he was never charged, and the case is officially cold as no one was ever tried for the murders, but given what we find out later, I wouldn't exactly put it past him. What we do know that happened because of Maddox's wife's death is Maddox received a pretty handsome insurance payout. Early FBI numbers say that the estimated value of this payout was $180,000, with some estimates being as high as $400,000. Either way, a lot of money. However, whatever amount of money it was didn't seem to be enough for Maddox, as he became involved in a lengthy legal process, claiming that the insurance company didn't pay him out what he was deserved because of the local police botching the investigation. After Maddox's father died in the spring of 1984, it seems that Maddox didn't really have a reason to stick around in Ohio, so his buddy Platt invited him to come live with Platt down in Miami, Florida. While in the Army, Platt had met a woman named Regina, and the two of them were married on Halloween of 1975, and from the outside looking in, seemed to have a very lovely home life. Regina was from Miami, Florida, so after Platt got out of the military, they moved down there. And as mentioned, since Maddox didn't really have anywhere to go, Platt invited Maddox to come down and be a part of his life. So much so that in 1984, Maddox bought a fourth of a company that Platt had started with his brother, a landscaping business called Blade Cutters. Platt had started Blade Cutters with his brother in 1982, leaving a job that he had with Regina's father to start the company, and Regina came onto the company as their bookkeeper. So Platt had a whole family business going on and invited Maddox into the fold. And things went fine for like less than a year. Because on May 17th of 1985, Maddox was effectively kicked out of Blade Cutters. Either his shares were bought up or dissolved because seemingly Platt's brother wanted nothing to do with him. The stated reason was personality differences, so do with that what you will. And also, apparently after this, Maddox just spent a while making toys, like little wooden toys, at the Blade Cutters warehouse. So like they kick him out of the company, but he won't leave. So it's a landscaping company, and then the guy who used to own a fourth of it is just in the corner building trains or something. The reason I say it was probably Platt's brother who had a problem with Maddox is because just a few months later, in August of 1985, Maddox and Platt would start another landscaping business called Yankee Clipper. Now, one of the reasons this fallout probably happened between Platt and his brother and Maddox and all that is because of what happened shortly before all of this in December of 1984. Because on December 21st of 1984, Platt's wife Regina would take her own life. Allegedly. So, according to the official report, Platt was in another room of his house when Regina took a shotgun and fired it into her mouth. There were no signs of a struggle. There was never any evidence to imply that it was forceful or Regina didn't act alone. However, what made people suspicious is several people around Platt had made comments to the effect that they were worried about Regina's safety around Platt leading up to this event. According to the FBI, there were allegations that Platt had been having an affair with a waitress up until October of 1984 that lasted for like a year. So the official narrative at the time was just that maybe Regina got word of that and couldn't live with the depression it put her under. But friends of Regina would later recount that Regina had came to them in the weeks before her death saying that she was afraid Platt was going to kill her. And one of Platt's friends would later say that Platt had said something to the effect of, "I'm just mad she killed herself because I wanted to do it." Similar to Maddox, even though there is no explicit proof or anything like that, it's not the kind of thing I'd put past him. Not helped by the fact that less than a month after Regina's death, Platt would remarry. To further complicate things, Platt had 3 children with Regina that he brought into this new marriage. I should also mention that Maddox had a daughter from his marriage with Patty, who was very young and also living with him down in Miami. But according to everyone else, people from the church, people from the community, if you didn't know about those pretty big blips in their history, they seemed to be model citizens. They attended church, their business was doing well. If you didn't know them one-on-one, everything seemed fine. However, people who did know them personally were very aware of some of the men's flaws. For example, Maddox, after he moved to Miami, had a habit of dating women for a couple weeks before asking them to marry him. He eventually married one woman who stayed with him for 2 weeks before they separated, and she would later go on to refer to him as a, quote, monster. In their short time together, she also became pregnant with his child, and after the child was born, he wanted nothing to do with it. Also in 1985, people who knew Maddox personally said that a lot of the conversations he would have always bordered on the morbid, something to do with death or leaving things behind after you die. And he would also say cryptic things like he has a warehouse with Platt where they keep vehicles and weapons for their secret missions, which only later would people find out what that might mean. There's also a couple of stories involving the 2 men that aren't explicitly confirmed, but they're too weird not to mention. For one, there is a story that got passed around in like local papers and rumors from like people who knew the 2 men that while Regina was still alive, Platt would apparently encourage her to sleep with Maddox. I don't know how true that is. Typically after, people do a really bad thing, everyone who ever knew them came out of the woodwork to talk about all these evil boogeyman stories that may or may not be real. Again, it's not like I'd put it past him. That just seems like a really weird side project. Which if that is true, that certainly adds to the reason why Regina might have done the thing that she did. And another really weird story about them that the details can't be 100% confirmed, but at least some of it is real, is the story around a guy named Earl Burnett. So Earl Burnett had a business where he would sell people vending machines. And then for some reason in 1985, Platt and Maddox bought 10 vending machines. I have no idea what they were going to do with those, but they did it. And then according to Platt and Maddox, the vending machines were faulty. So they send the vending machines back to Burnett. Burnett says that the vending machines were fine when he sent them, so the 2 men must have broken them and then sent them back in order to get a refund. Apparently, the 2 men were so mad about this that in June of 1985, they drove to Lincoln, Nebraska. And that is not up for debate. Both the men as well as Burnett say that they went to Lincoln, Nebraska in June of 1985 to get their money back from Burnett. Burnett says they did this by showing up at his house at like 7 in the morning and then acting like they had guns in their coat pocket, ordered him to get in the car. Now, according to Platt and Maddox, they just wanted to talk about their refund, and either way, the 3 men ended up going to breakfast at a local restaurant. While they're there are police officers eating in the restaurant, to which Burnett runs over to them and begins to scream that the 2 men he is eating with are going to kill him. So this causes a whole scene. The police officers pat down Platt and Maddox, and turns out they don't have any weapons on them, but Platt and Maddox are so mad about this, they get a lawyer and try to file a lawsuit against Burnett, and it became a whole thing for years that was never really resolved up until the thing that these men would later do, title of the video, right? Which had to be really weird for Burnett because I'm sure everyone thought he was crazy because he's literally the vending machine salesman and he's telling people that there's 2 men trying to kill him over his vending machines. And I'm sure everyone thought he was insane until he might have actually sold vending machines to the 2 people in the country who would kill someone over vending machines. While the details of all of that are foggy, what we do know is over the course of 1985, the 2 men seemed to get desperate. Maddox seemed to be directionless. Sure, he had a daughter, but he had lost his wife by someone's doing and seemed to just kind of be doing odd job to make ends meet. And after the death of Regina, again by someone's doing, it can be assumed that Platt was in a similarly dark position. Either way, it seems that over the course of 1985, the two men had developed a want for more and devaluation of human life. And if there was ever a market to have that opinion, it was Miami in the 1980s. And it seemed that the greatest way to get rich fast, if you don't care about people, was bank robbery. According to Ed Morales, in the year leading up to the Miami-Dade shootout, there was a bank robbery in Miami, or a bank truck robbery, every day, with some days having as many as 5 robberies. Miami is the one place in the country that can give LA a run for its money when it comes to high crime. So perhaps one day one of the guys read the paper or turned on the news and got an idea of how they were going to get rich quick and how they were going to step on a lot of people to do it. The first act of violence that we know the two men committed was on October the 4th of 1985. It was on that date that a young man named Emilio Brill went out shooting in southwest Miami. There was this big rock pit off of a trailhead that people kind of used as just a dump site, so a bunch of local people knew it as a place you could go set up cans and shoot around for fun. It was on that date that a 25-year-old Emilio left his parents' house to go shooting at this dump outside of town. He drove away in his 1977 gold Chevy Monte Carlo and was never seen again. The next day, after his father couldn't find him the night before, his parents filed a missing persons report, but otherwise just had to wait. Now, this first robbery can't 100% be confirmed to be Platt and Maddox, but investigators believe it was just because of their MO and because afterwards people around them gave reasoning to why this should be them, so we're going to assume it is for now. Only 5 days after Emilio went missing, on October the 9th, 1985, a Loomis Wells Fargo bank truck was parked in front of a Steak and Ale restaurant at 12:30 p.m. to get a money pickup. These bank trucks would make their round to various businesses that had excess in cash, and the bank truck would transport the money to the bank in order to make sure everything was safe and, random people weren't getting robbed. The Wells Fargo truck consisted of a driver and a courier. The driver pulled up in front of the Steak and Ale restaurant, and the courier got out, went inside, and grabbed the cash. As the courier made his way back out of the restaurant with the duffel bag of cash, 2 men approached him and said, "Don't move or I'll shoot." The 2 men had, according to the courier, an M16 rifle and a .45 caliber pistol, and were wearing ski masks, camouflage, helmets, and bulletproof vests. So the 2 robbers are holding the courier at gunpoint and lead him around to the back of the truck. They tell him to open the back of the truck, and the courier says that the driver has the keys and he's the only one who can open it. So they drag the courier around to the front of the truck, and while pointing the gun at him, tell the driver to come open the back door or they'll kill the courier. And the driver just drives away. He just leaves that guy on his knees in a Steak and Ale parking lot. And the robbers were so mad that they just started shooting at the back door of the bank truck as it drives away, which obviously doesn't do anything. So the courier's on the ground, and he's like, "Please don't kill me." So they hit him in the head, and then they drive away. But as they drive away, they throw out smoke grenades from the windows to cover their escape, I guess. And yeah, all they did was they stole the duffel bag that the courier had walked out with, which contained $2,825. So a big first score. It's company policy with a lot of those companies to just drive away, because the idea is if you stick around, there's a larger chance someone will get hurt or don't comply with demands or whatever. I get all that, but it's just a funny visual. I imagine the driver was making eye contact with his friend, and just you can see him slowly reach down and put the truck in gear. He has to 3-point turn to get out. Just leaves him. Also, the smoke grenades were incredibly dramatic. It's Miami at noon. There are 800 cars on the road. No one's going to find you. But what they will find is 2 smoke grenades in the middle of the highway. The courier said that the 2 men left in a blue or gray 4-door vehicle, and a bystander managed to get the tags on the vehicle. Probably wouldn't have been looking if there weren't smoke grenades in the road. And the plates came back as a match to a vehicle that was reported stolen a week earlier. At the same time this was happening, because again there was such a plethora of bank robberies happening in Miami at the time, that the FBI office in Miami had a division known as the C1 division. And C1's entire job was bank robberies. So the FBI agents at C1 responded to this event and started a profile on these bandits, who would later become known within the C1 as the Unknown Bandits. I guess a play on their ski masks because they think they're so mysterious. Well, the FBI agents wouldn't have to wait long, because only a week later, on October the 16th, the Unknown Bandits would hit again. Oh, sorry, it's not the Unknown Bandits, it's the Unknown Gang. I'm going to keep calling them the Unknown Bandits. It sounds more demeaning. On October the 16th of 1985, another Wells Fargo truck was in the parking lot of a Winn-Dixie doing another pickup. For this arrangement, the Wells Fargo truck had 3 people working the truck that day: the driver, the courier, and a lookout. The way it worked is a lookout would walk up to the building first, wait a couple minutes to make sure there wasn't anyone, ready to jump out and rob them, and then the lookout would signal for the courier to come inside of the building, and then when it was time to leave, the lookout would wait at the front of the store until the courier was loaded up, and then they would signal for him to come onto the truck. So all of that went fine on the entry, but as they were making their way back out, the courier was halfway to the parking lot between the lookout and the driver when suddenly the bandits would attack again. This time, as the courier is making his way across the crowded parking lot, one of the 2 men would run up wearing the same attire, the ski mask, the camouflage, and then yell, "Freeze," before shooting the courier in the thigh with a shotgun. Which, I don't know what the point is in yelling "freeze" and then shooting someone. It's stupid. It's announcing that you're there before you fire a gun. Immediately, the driver and the lookout pull their guns and start returning fire on the guy who just shot the courier. As they're doing this, a second robber with some kind of rifle begins to fire back as well, and the 2 robbers get away without being shot and also without getting any money. And the courier, who was shot in the leg, survived and recovered, so really they just caused a lot of noise for no reason. It was really hard for the FBI to get anything out of this investigation because there were a ton of eyewitnesses, but everyone claimed to have seen something different. Some people were saying that they saw a getaway driver, some people saying it was as many as 4 people. Everyone reported a different color and kind of car. I think what happened is there were just several cars in the parking lot, so when the shooting happened, someone just saw like a car and assumed that had to be the car for some reason. Either way, it seems that the 2 were not happy about this botched robbery because they did another one the next day. And if you thought the Winn-Dixie bank robbery was stupid, this one is incredibly stupid. On October the 17th, there was a Loomis truck that was picking up a delivery from a Dalt's restaurant. The parking lot was crowded, so the bank truck pulled into the alley right behind the Dalt's restaurant. As the courier is making his way outside, he's walking to the car, and behind the dumpster in the alley, he sees 2 men standing there with, again, an identified M16, just waiting on him to get close. And I swear I'm not kidding, that courier was the same courier from the Steak and Ale robbery a week earlier. So the guy who got left by his driver, just alone in the parking lot, was now about to be left alone in an alley. So in response, he sees the 2 men and without saying anything, drops the money bag, pulls his revolver, and shoots 4 times. That guy said absolutely not. What's really funny to imagine is he recognized them like in their stupid ski mask and camo and everything, which what's the point of camouflage in downtown Miami? But he sees the 2 of them, and like that just makes you stand out so much more. Anyway, he sees the 2 of them and he's like, "You again?" Just like dumps the cylinder on it. Anyway, this time the 2 don't even shoot back. They see that the robbery's not going in their favor, so they turn the corner and get out of there. It seems that the 2 men were unsatisfied with their lack of results because they would wait 3 weeks until their next robbery on November the 8th of 1985. On that day in the early morning, a Florida National Bank teller was working one of the drive-through windows attached to the bank. The little drive-through section that he was in was separate from the bank itself, so when he ran out of money, he had to walk across the parking lot to go back inside of the bank to get more money for the teller stand. He grabbed $10,000 in cash and was being escorted by a guard back out to his teller post. As the 2 are walking back to the teller stand, they hear someone yell "freeze" and turn around to see the unknown bandits standing there, pointing again an M16 and a revolver at the 2 men. They take the bag with the $10,000 and then demand for the teller to unlock his booth. The teller is so afraid and freaked out, and his hands are shaking so much that he breaks off the key to the booth inside of the lock. The robbers are upset by this and slap the teller in frustration, and then get into a black four-door vehicle and begin to drive away. However, as luck would have it, an off-duty police officer was in line for the drive-thru and saw all of this happen. He had his revolver with him and began to aim it at the two men through the windshield as they walked by. The robbers saw him pointing the pistol at them and raised their rifle, to which quickly the cop put the gun down. However, this didn't deter the cop, because as soon as the men leave the parking lot, he leaves the line and begins to tail them through town. He does this for a few blocks before the two robbers stop the car in the road. One of them gets out, stands next to the back of the car, and points a rifle straight at the man, which is a pretty clear sign to stop following him. So this time the cop leaves, but in the process of telling them, he manages to get their plate number. This time when the C1 division responds to the robbery, this man is able to give a pretty detailed account of the suspect's ethnicity, build, relative weight. So perhaps the two robbers, after this event, figured that because they weren't willing to get violent and loud, they allowed some information about them to get out, which means they're just one step closer to getting caught. This is a mistake they would not let happen again. Because that same day, only 90 minutes after that robbery, they would rob another bank. About 18 blocks away at around noon, the two men would enter the Professional Savings Bank, and this time it was a more traditional takeover bank robbery. The two men went in with guns, started pointing them at people, telling everyone to get down, and demanding for a teller to take them to the safe. They were sporting the same rifle and revolver that were reported at the bank robbery 90 minutes earlier. One of the two men, and we don't know if this was Maddox or Platt, because again, they were wearing masks through this whole thing, but one of the two men hopped over the counter and told one of the tellers to take them to the Wells Fargo drop-off. It seemed that they had been casing out the bank and knew that earlier that morning, Wells Fargo had dropped off duffel bags of cash. After threatening to shoot employees, the vault was eventually unlocked, and the men left with 3 duffel bags of cash worth $41,469. And eyewitnesses said that the pair drove off in a gold Monte Carlo. And it seems that after this one, the two had finally successfully robbed a bank or bank-related thing the way that they planned to rob it. There was no not being able to get into the truck. There was no key breaking off in the teller stand or whatever. If you combine that with the $10,000 they took at the bank an hour and a half earlier, they had made over $50,000. And it seemed that this satisfied the two men to some degree, because they wouldn't hit another bank for a couple months. However, it seemed that letting the cop tail them from the earlier job in November was still ringing in their ears, because when they did rob a bank again on January the 10th of 1986, they were much more violent. At 10:30 a.m., a Brinks truck was performing a drop-off at a Continental Bank branch. The courier was standing at the back of the truck unloading bags of money when all of a sudden he was shot in the back. One of the two had ran up and shot the teller in the back with a shotgun, and as he laid on the ground, the other one walked over with his rifle and shot him twice more in the back. They grabbed the bags of money out of the back of the bank truck, threw them in the gold Monte Carlo, and drove away. Somehow, the courier was critically injured, but somehow he survived. Getting shot a lot and surviving is going to become a common theme as we continue through this story. Someone who was in the bank parking lot saw this go down and decided to tell the Monte Carlo as it left the bank. It followed the Monte Carlo to just a couple blocks down the road when the Monte Carlo parked in a Burger King parking lot, and the two men got out, took the money and weapons, got into a white Ford truck, and drove away. So this investigation was pretty easy for the C1, because when they showed up to ask questions, this guy was like, yeah, they parked right there. So the FBI make their way over to the Burger King parking lot and investigate the Monte Carlo. While they weren't able to pull anything conclusively on prints, the inside of the car was pretty junked up, they were able to get information from the plates. As the plates were registered to Emilio Brielle's father, the boy who went missing on October 4th that I mentioned earlier. Initially, the police were suspicious of the Brielle family because the car was never reported stolen, so it didn't pop up in their system. But when Ed Morales, again the guy who wrote the book about this whole thing, went to interview the family, he realized it's because they had just reported their son missing, and the car was never officially stolen, and it was the son that they cared about. Quite heartbreakingly, Ed Morales just takes Brielle's father out to the area where his son went missing, the rock pit outside of town, and he said he just drove around with the father all day, hoping they could find something about the boy. It would be a couple months later, on March the 1st of 1986, that Emilio's body was found. It seemed that the two men had shot Emilio in the head and then pushed his body off the side of a nearby trail into the surrounding swamps. What was left of Emilio was mostly bones and tattered clothes at that point. It seems that Platt and Maddox had killed the boy just so there wouldn't be any witnesses, and they didn't want to commit the robberies in their own vehicle, so they figured they'd just kill someone and take theirs. We know this because less than 2 weeks after Emilio's body was found, the two men would do this same thing again. On March the 12th of 1986, a man named Jose Collazo was out target shooting near the area where Emilio disappeared, or as we know now, was murdered. He had driven out there in his black two-door 1979 Monte Carlo. As he was out shooting, he said two men pulled up in a white Ford F-150 and just parked near him, watching for a little bit. Eventually, the truck drove down and the two men stepped out of the vehicle with weapons pointed at him. They took his keys and asked him if he was a cop for some reason before telling him to walk to a nearby pond. One of the two men ordered him to get down on his knees, and Jose, realizing where this was going, decided to fight back. As he went to turn, Jose was shot in the back and the arm before beginning a struggle for the rifle. As they fought over the gun, it went off again, this round hitting Jose in the side of the head, to which Jose, very smartly, played dead. The two men, assuming that he had been killed, stole his car and drove away in both vehicles. When they drove away, Jose got up and walked after having been shot 3 times several miles through the woods before getting to a nearby highway where he was able to flag down a car that was filled with a family on a tourism trip from Michigan who managed to call the police and get him to the hospital. Now keep in mind, at this point, there's no connection between the series of bank robberies and this guy being shot and left for dead outside of the city with his vehicle stolen. It was the next day when one of the head investigators at the C1, an agent named Ben Grogan, saw the story in the newspaper and decided that's their guy. Because it was the same MO and location as Emilio's killing, Grogan correctly assumed that this must be them trying to get another vehicle to commit another robbery. But what they didn't count on this time was leaving Jose as a witness. So agents Ben Grogan and Jerry Dove go to interview Jose in the hospital, and Jose gives them a ton of useful information. He got a really good look at the guy, so he was able to provide police sketches and detailed attributes as to the men's voice and how they behaved. He was able to confirm that the rifle the man was carrying was a Ruger Mini 14, and because there weren't that many weapons found after the fact, I'm going to assume that all of the M16 reports from earlier robberies were actually this Ruger Mini 14, which helps establish a connection between those robberies and our bandits as we would know them to be now. And of course, Jose's plate number of NTJ891. Well, it seems after acquiring a new getaway car, the guys were excited to use it because they would commit their next robbery 1 week later. As a matter of fact, they would go back to the same bank they committed the January 10th robbery at, the one where the courier was shot 3 times and someone identified the gold Monte Carlo. This was another takeover robbery with them going in and being loud and jumping behind the desk so that they could steal money directly from tellers. At one point, again, either Platt or Maddox, we don't know, at the front door yelled to whoever was stealing money from the tellers, "Hurry up, John," which obviously John is an alias, neither of them are named John. I bet they thought they were so clever for that one. And the two would leave in a black Monte Carlo, to which a bystander confirmed the plate number, confirming that all of these were the same people. However, this takeover netted a much lower amount compared to their last robbery, as at this one they only stole $8,338. The C1 division wanted these people caught fast. It seems that they had no plans on stopping their robberies anytime soon, and they were willing to kill as many people as necessary in order to make it happen, even if it was just killing people in order to grab another getaway car. Which, by the way, I was thinking about this reading on the case. It seems kind of counterintuitive to steal cars from people who have guns, right? Like, why would you go to a shooting range or an area people are shooting at in order to steal their car? Wouldn't you want to be somewhere where people are more defenseless? But then, if they're planning on shooting that person, then it's probably good to go to an area that is already pre-established as having gunfire at it, or letting the person shoot for a little bit. That way, if a bystander hears a gunshot, they won't think anything of it. Anyway, C1 is doing everything they can to try to catch these guys. And one of the first things they do is simply driving around town looking for either the Monte Carlo and just writing down the license plate numbers of white Ford F-150s you see in suspicious places. The idea being, if you have a bunch of different plate numbers for white Ford F-150s, you can send them into the DMV, find out who that vehicle is registered to, and then you could show the images of those people in a lineup to Jose, who interacted with the men directly. So in late April, early March, the C1 division did this, but it would take some time for the report to come back from the DMV. At this point, the C1 division had established some commonality in the unknown bandits' banditry. They always hit banks on Friday, seemingly because that is when the money trucks made their drops. And the time between robberies would be shorter or longer depending on how much money they took. Remember, the time that they didn't rob any more banks for a couple months was when they got $50,000. But at the last robbery on March the 19th, they only got $8,000, meaning that another robbery was probably going to happen soon. Because of this, C1 determined that on April the 11th, 1986, there was probably going to be another robbery. So they were going to do something called a rolling stakeout. Basically, they were going to have several FBI agents scattered around southern Miami where all of the robberies took place, and they were going to case various banks or bank trucks and see if anything were to happen. And even if they're not at the bank where a robbery is taking place, they will be in the area to respond to one. So on that morning of April the 11th, 14 FBI agents broke up into 11 different cars and began their patrols of southern Miami. I can't really do this amount of time justice as much as like Ed Morales does in his telling of events. He goes into great detail about how jovial the tone was between everyone that day, how they were excited to catch the bad guys, but no one really thought, no one knew what would happen next. The morning started out casual. People took their positions at various banks around town. They radioed into each other what they were doing. Someone said they needed to go to the bathroom. Someone said they'd be out of service for a while. Everything was normal until 9:30 a.m. Agents Grogan and Dove, the same ones who interviewed Jose, and Grogan, the same one who made the connection about Jose in the first place, was parked at the Barnett Shopping Center that had a bank attached to it. By coincidence, there was a local police officer also parked in the parking lot of the shopping center that morning. All of the FBI agents were in unmarked cars in order to not raise any suspicion. At 9:30 a.m., Grogan and Dove are sitting in their vehicle when all of a sudden, a black two-door vehicle that might be a Monte Carlo drives into the parking lot, seemingly sees the police officer parked in the parking lot, and then drives away. Dove and Grogan think that's kind of weird and decide to start tailing it. They report to the other agents on the radio that they're following up on this lead, but again, as far as they know now, it's just a two-door black vehicle. Nothing conclusive yet. However, 1 minute later at 9:31 a.m., Grogan calls out that not only is it a two-door black Monte Carlo, but it has the same license plate. I cannot properly describe how stupid that is. Like, yes, they thought they left Jose for dead in the Everglades, sure, but at this point, the license plate had been plastered on newspapers, it had been plastered on the news, the FBI were throwing NTJ 891 out everywhere to try to get some lead. And for these guys who are so down to steal everything, can you not just like pull a license plate out off a car in a parking lot? Like, why is that where you draw the line? You'll shoot someone in the head, no problem, but you won't bring a Phillips head screwdriver, I guess. But that's another thing that annoys me so much. So many bank robbers that otherwise would have completely got away with it get arrested because of a license plate. There was the one in, I think it was Tacoma, Washington, where like 4 Army Rangers, like these super well-trained guys, performed like a perfectly executed bank robbery. They were in and out in 2 minutes. It was going great. But they took the back license plate off of their car, but they didn't take the front one off. So someone ID'd the car, and then the police just drove to their house and arrested them. And there was that other one, what's her name? Cowboy Bob. I think what was her real name? Peggy Jo Tallis, yeah. She was a robber who the police didn't even know they were looking for for like months, because she would do her robberies in a get-up to make her look like an old man. So the police thought they were looking for an old man, only to find out that it was a woman. And you know how they found out? Because she used her car with the plates on. Why are people okay with I'll bring a gun, I'll shoot someone, but if you ask me to mess with like DMV regulations, that's my line in the sand. That's not related to, I'll get back to the shootout, okay? So at 9:31 a.m., Grogan calls out that this is the car they're looking for, and all the FBI agents start to converge on their position. At this point, they're following the Monte Carlo through traffic, and there's enough cars between them that it's not suspicious. So the other agents are just trying to casually make their way through traffic, no blue lights or sirens or anything, to not give up the game. In a case of just bad luck, several of the agents were out of earshot of the radio when this call was made. Keep in mind, this was at a time when radios were much less effective than they are now, and were also relegated to the inside of the car. You couldn't bring them with you when you went in places. 2 agents were out using the bathroom when the call came in. Another one was out of service filling up the car with gas when the call came in. And another one was reporting to a bank, telling them they're in the area if they see anything suspicious. So at the exact moment that the FBI needs as many people as they can on this, 4 vehicles are out of earshot. Eventually, 2 other FBI cars managed to get behind the Monte Carlo. I've already mentioned the one that Grogan and Dove is driving that is the closest to the Monte Carlo, but then second behind Grogan and Dove is a car with Hanton and Morellis in it, and then behind them is a car with Agent Manazzi in it. So the 3 FBI vehicles are tailing the Monte Carlo, and it's not really sure what Maddox and Platt were thinking at this time. Maybe they saw the cop car and were just calling off the robbery for the day, or maybe they were driving to another bank, who knows. But eventually, the Monte Carlo starts to make its way into less and less crowded roadways until 3 pristine vehicles following them at every turn starts to become suspicious. At some point, it seems that Platt and Maddox caught on to this because they start performing nonsensical maneuvers to see if the 3 cars are still following them. Have you ever heard the saying that if you ever think you're being followed, just make 3 right turns and see if the car's still following you? Because if you make 3 right turns, you're going the opposite of the direction you were originally heading, right? So the Monte Carlo does that. It makes 3 right turns, and the FBI agents, knowing that they look suspicious, can't bear to let the car get away. Because think about it, right? They don't know anything about who the unknown bandits are in the Monte Carlo. They don't know their names, they don't have any data about them. They just know that they're willing to kill a lot of people, and that is definitely them in the car. So even if you look suspicious, even if you give yourself away, you can't afford to let these guys get away, because who knows who they'll kill again. The Monte Carlo starts driving real slow, and then the 3 FBI agents behind them have to start driving real slow, and it's eventually apparent to everyone that the jig is up. Agent McNeil, who was catching up to them, just so happened to be driving the other direction of the convoy, and said that as he drove by, he saw the passenger of the vehicle loading up a rifle. And given everything that the FBI knows about these guys, it is very unlikely that they will go away quietly. So then the FBI has to ask themselves another question. If this is going to be a gunfight, where do we want it to happen at? Because South Miami is a very crowded area. There is a huge chance of catching someone in the crossfire. Eventually, the Monte Carlo turns onto 82nd Avenue in southern Miami. It's hard to see now because the area's been developed so much more since then, but at the time this was a much more relatively sparse area compared to the streets around it. A few streets to the east and you had a large neighborhood that had a school, and to the west you had a very busy highway. There's no telling what the men in the Monte Carlo would do if they got desperate, and the FBI knew it was now or never. They began to communicate this to each other over the radio, saying things like, "Now's the time, we have to go, let's do it," until finally Ben Grogan said over the radio, Take them, felony car stop, let's do it. And Grogan threw the blue light into the dash of his unmarked car and initiated a traffic stop. As he does this, Grogan pulls the car all the way around to get in front of the Monte Carlo, and Hanton, seeing his play, pulls into the left lane, getting on the left side of the Monte Carlo, meaning now the vehicle is boxed in and can only drive off the road or stop. The Monte Carlo takes the third option and begins to speed up, hitting Grogan's car and trying to slam Hanton's car out of the way. This keeps up for a few seconds until Manazi, seeing the play the other FBI agents are doing, speeds his car up that was previously third in line and rams the back of the Monte Carlo. This has the intended effect of causing the Monte Carlo to lose control, but because Hanton and the Monte Carlo were like hitting each other from the left and right, when the Monte Carlo gets knocked out of the way, it causes Hanton to lose control, and his car with Morales and Hanton veers off and runs into the concrete wall of a nearby substation. The Monte Carlo completely loses control and gets turned all the way around, now facing the north direction, the direction that the FBI and the Monte Carlo had previously come from. This gives the bandits a clear shot because now all of the FBI vehicles are to the south, and there is a wide open way to get onto the highway to the north and make an escape. Manazi sees this and is determined to not let the men get away, so he uses the only thing at his disposal, the car he's driving, and rams it full speed into the side of the Monte Carlo. This pushes the car all the way across the road and through the driveway of a house off 82nd Avenue, where it stops by hitting a car parked in someone's driveway. Manazi, coming out of the haze of the wreck he just caused, sees the door of the Monte Carlo open and a shotgun barrel stick out, while a rifle barrel from the passenger seat aims over the driver's seat, pointed directly at him. Manazi panics and quickly throws open the door to get out of the way, and as he does, the first shots of the shootout are fired at 9:35 a.m. What would occur over the next 5 minutes is probably some of the most discussed 5 minutes, I would argue, in law enforcement or gunfight history. So why don't I just show you a stupid little diagram of all of this in the only stupid little way I know how. Look, if you wanted something that wasn't this, you wouldn't be here. Okay? So I'm not even going to be sorry about it. Let's just talk about it. So this direction is to the north and this direction is to the south. Originally, the convoy was driving this way with McNeil driving the other direction. He's the guy who said he saw the guy in the passenger seat loading a rifle was driving northbound. When Manazi rammed into Platt and Maddox, it caused Hanlon and Morales to spin out of control and hit a wall. Again, Platt and Maddox were now faced northbound, so as they tried to move, Manazi hit them, and that's why their two cars were stopped here. McNeil, who had passed the convoy, did a U-turn to catch back up, and after the wreck happened, he pulled in right here to assist Manazi. And Grogan and Dove, who were at the front and not in a car wreck, did a U-turn and stopped here in order to get out and try to apprehend the suspects. Now, before the wreck even happened, Manazi had made a fatal error. It's not uncommon, especially if you're sitting in a vehicle and your gun belt's kind of in an uncomfortable position. It's not uncommon if you're expecting to use it to take the gun out and set it somewhere in the car. However, Manazi had done that not expecting himself to get into a car wreck. When they were originally driving this way and Manazi hit Platt and Maddox from the rear end, as he made contact, it jarred his passenger door open and the gun flew in that direction. So Manazi thought that his gun had flew out of the car when in reality it was just wedged between the passenger seat and the door. That's probably one of the reasons that Manazi made the charge when he did. He didn't have a gun to stop these guys anymore, so he just used the car. So everyone came to a stop at 12201 Southwest 82nd Avenue, which I'll show actual demonstrations and street view and stuff like that here now, so you can understand where my visions come from. As mentioned earlier, Manazi saw the driver door open and a shotgun point towards Grogan and Dove. Over the driver's shoulder, he saw someone else point a rifle directly at him, and being unarmed, he had no other option than to open the driver door and roll out of the vehicle. From what we know now, Maddox was driving and Platts was in the passenger seat. As Manazi rolls out of the car, Platts fires at him. Now, initially, Manazi thought he had been hit by a shotgun blast in the back, but what had actually happened is one of the 223 rounds from Platt's Mini 14 rifle had fractured across the steel of Manazi's vehicle and had hit him in a scatter across the back. A lot of the stuff I'm going to describe is going to be very scattered, but what you have to understand is all of this happened incredibly fast. If I'm describing one person or set of events and you're like, well, what's the other guy doing during this time? There's probably 3 seconds between the two different actions. So it's not like people were just standing around waiting for the next event to happen. I'm breaking down a lot of things that pretty much happened all at once. Just to clean up the board a little bit, Manazi, again thinking that his gun had fallen from outside of the vehicle, crawls in this direction behind the car and looks in the center of the street where he thinks his gun might have fallen out at. Manazi can't find it, and as he's continuing to be shot at, Manazi eventually makes his way around to a wall that is running along the west side of the road. I'll go ahead and draw the wall here just so you remember it's there. Manazi would take cover behind this wall for the remainder of the gunfight. Now, a lot of people write Manazi off for this. They'll say, this guy's a coward, how could he hide behind a wall while his friends are being shot at, or whatever. But I want to remind you, he doesn't have a gun, and they have a lot of gun. So I don't really know what you want him to do. He didn't have a spare in his vehicle. He didn't know of any of the other officers having a spare. Should they have brought more? Sure, but now is not the time to have hindsight. And I also want to keep in mind that the whole reason they were stopped in the first place is because Manazi, completely unarmed, decided to ram his car directly into them. Also, I would like to see you being shot in the face by a rifle over and over. Still try to find your gun in the middle of the street before you seek cover. There was another incident that happened when the cars came to a stop as well. So Ben Grogan always wore glasses. He had these thick rim glasses that allegedly it was hard for him to see without. I've heard it debated as to how blind he was without his glasses. Some said he couldn't see a thing. Others said that things were just kind of blurry. Who knows? But either way, when the car slammed to a stop, Ben's glasses flew off of his face. Being unable to recover them, Grogan and Dove step out of the vehicle, and Grogan yells, "FBI, you're under arrest." At the same time this is happening, McNeil moves up to Mazazi's car to give him cover as Mazazi makes his way to the wall. At the same time this is happening, Morellis and Hanlon move up to help their boys. Hanlon makes his way over to Grogan and Dove, while Morellis moves over to help McNeil. Keep in mind there are gunshots flying in the midst of all of this, and about 20 seconds has passed. Maybe 15, a very short amount of time. McNeil is laying over the hood of the car, shooting his revolver, but he is laying so close to the hood that he has to hold the revolver sideways as he fires 4 shots. And if you're wondering why it was pressed so hard into the hood, keep in mind that Platt is still firing rifle rounds in his direction. Morellis gets over to the back of McNeil's car, and as he turns the corner, he sees that McNeil is firing at the top of the hood. Where's that shotgun at? Morellis has his gun trained around the front of Maddox and Platt's vehicle, but as he turns the corner, he sees that he's aiming right at McNeil. Not wanting to accidentally fire towards McNeil, Morales lifts his gun like this for a moment. As soon as he does, a bullet flies from Platt's rifle directly towards Morales' chest. However, because of the position he moved his arm into, the rifle round instead hits his arm, the bullet fracturing through his forearm and effectively mutilating it. Morellis thinks that he has run into the back of McNeil's truck because he's so hyped up and amped up from being in a gunfight that he's just running and then something stops him all at once, not realizing he's been shot. It wasn't until he fell to the ground and looked at his arm, something he would describe as a mangled piece of roadkill, that he didn't even recognize as himself. So for the time being, Morellis is lying somewhere between McNeil and Mazazu's car, just almost dying. Because if his arm being decimated wasn't bad enough, a fragment round at some point sparks off the ground and hits him in the side of the head, injuring his temporal artery. It would be described that every time his heart pumped, blood would shoot 8 feet out the side of his head. So yeah, Morellis isn't doing so good, so we'll come back to him in a minute. I should also mention Morellis was the only one here equipped with a shotgun. Everyone else had a handgun, either revolvers or a 9mm. It was also around this stage that two agents, Gilbert and Ron, had arrived from the northbound direction. The two of them were part of the stakeout and had just got to the meetup late. So they came and parked on this side of the road and provided covering fire throughout the rest of the shootout. And again, they're equipped with a revolver and a 9mm, so there's not a ton they can do to punch through the hull of the car, but you know, it's the thought that counts when it comes to support fire. Another reason they parked here where they did is because the only avenue of exit these two have is if they take off towards the neighborhood further north, but there's no way the two of them could make a break for it without Gilbert and Ron seeing. So Platt is still in the passenger seat firing this direction, and as mentioned earlier, Maddox is in the driver's seat aiming backwards towards these three. Ben Grogan, who mind you is at least partially blind during this whole thing because he lost his glasses, is credited as getting the first hit as one of his handgun rounds hits Maddox in the right hand, with a fragment from another shot, or someone else's over here, also striking Maddox in the cheek. Morellis, starting to come out of his haze, looks over at his left arm, which at this point is attached by one strip of skin on his forearm, and in frustration and delirium, he throws the useless arm out of the way and grabs his shotgun, which is a problem because as a pump action, you kind of need, you know, two hands to pump it, but he hasn't got that far yet. Platts eventually realizes they're going to die if they don't move quick, and also they are pushed too close against the car that is parked here to open the door. So Platts shatters the passenger window and begins to crawl out of it. As Platts is climbing out of the passenger window, facing away from the gunfight, Dove would fire a round that is probably the most debated shot in law enforcement history, if not just like defense shooting history ever. Dove, standing from about 15 yards out, fired a shot of his 9mm, which was shooting a 115 grain hollow point round. Platts was pushing himself out of the window in a position similar to this, and Dove's round came and hit his right bicep before crossing over into his chest and lodging itself in his lung about 2 inches from his heart. Visibly, Platts winced at this and lost his footing for a second. This was a remarkable shot on a moving target from 15 yards in the midst of all the gunfight and confusion. And you would think, oh, someone shot in the chest like that should hypothetically be a kill shot. And you'd think that, wouldn't you? I mean, at the very least enough to get him to quit shooting back, but again, we'll get to that. Platt stumbles his way over to the front of these cars and at some point is hit again in the thigh and in the foot. At the same time, the two agents over here see Platts getting out and fire more shots to him, one of them hitting him in the right arm and in the chest. The right arm, it would later be found, severed his radial bone. At this point, Platts had fired so many shots from his Ruger Mini 14 that he needed to reload it, meaning he had fired all 30 rounds. And as they started shooting at him while he was mid-reload, he pulled his revolver and fired 3 shots towards them in order to buy time to reload his rifle. So at this point, Platt has been hit 5 times, with one of them being a very severe injury, yet he's still going. We don't know when this happened because Maddox kind of disappears from the fight for a while, but at some point Maddox followed Platt's idea, realizing that was the only way out of the car, and Maddox crawled out of the car as well. For now, we'll just assume that he's hunkered down in here somewhere. At some point a little earlier in the fight, when McNeil was firing his revolver sideways over the hood of the car, one of Platt's rounds struck him between the pointer and middle finger. The rifle round ripped through the top of his hand, and for anyone else this would mean losing your gun. But according to Morellis, McNeil was shot, jerked his hand back, looked at his hand for a second, and then switched over to his left hand as he attempted to reload and keep shooting. It's at this point McNeil realizes he can't be useful trying to operate his revolver just left-handed because, you know, reloads like that are kind of difficult. So he begins to make his way back to his car to get a shotgun out of the back. As McNeil makes his way over to his car, he is shot by Platt, and the round goes into his lung and damages his spine. McNeil falls to the ground, temporarily paralyzed, and for the rest of the gunfight, he would lay there in the street. Dove, to get more cover, because there's not a ton of cover on the right side of this vehicle, in line with them, Dove moves over to the left side of the vehicle where Grogan is. Hanlon said he never saw Dove move around the back of the car, and because it's not really realistic for him to move around the front of the car, Dove probably crawled through the car itself to get over to the left-hand side. Around the same time that McNeil was hit, Platt would fire a couple rounds that seriously injured Dove and Grogan. Dove especially, who was shot in the hip, was unable to move for the rest of the gunfight. There's another factor happening here that isn't really accounted for yet. So in the midst of the smoke from the cars colliding with each other and all of the gun smoke that is now floating up in the air, plus the fact that they are facing the east in the morning, so the sun is rising over here, all of the agents on this side, particularly the two that are providing support fire from up here, can't see anything. They can make out Platt's when he moved around to the front of the car, but for all of this angle, it was a very sunny day in Miami. It's just like a blaze of orange, and what they can see is gun smoke. So at some point, these two lose sight of Platt, and they have no idea where he went. The first person who saw where Platt went would be Hanlon, who poked his head out to the right to see that Platt was walking straight towards him. Platt is walking along this line as he shoots and hits Hanlon in the hand, causing Hanlon to lose his weapon. Platt, now standing near the car, not knowing where Dove and Grogan are, fires several rounds around the rear end of the vehicle in an attempt to kill Hanlon. A couple of the rounds hit Hanlon in the leg, and several fracture and cause him to receive injuries all over his body, but thankfully none were lethal. However, the same couldn't be said, sadly, for Grogan and Dove, because as Platt is standing at the rear of the vehicle right after he fired the shots at Hanlon, Platt looks over the vehicle and sees Grogan making his way around to the rear, to which Platt fires a round through the vehicle, which would strike Grogan in the chest, killing him. It was at this point that the two agents up here could see where Platt was now after, hearing the new gunfire and all, but they couldn't shoot because shooting would mean they're firing directly at Dove. So they just begin to scream and yell for Dove to turn around, that Platt's right there with them. But sadly, Dove is in no condition to respond. Not only has he been hit in the hip, but as the crime scene would later reveal, his gun had been shot as well. So Platt, assuming Hanlon dead and knowing Grogan dead, moves all the way around to this side of the vehicle to find Dove facing the other direction, again thinking that they're still over here. And a lot of people will hear that and be like, oh, we couldn't hear the gunshot happen right here. Normally, like, stories from people in gunfights, they get zoned out, they can't really hear anything, they can't really gauge distance and stuff like that. It's not far-fetched to believe he wouldn't have realized Platt was standing over here, especially considering the condition he was in, having been shot in the hip, and when Platt moved around the vehicle, Dove was bent over his handgun, trying to take out the magazine to try to get the weapon operating, but again, the gun was shot, so it wasn't happening. So Platt moved behind Dove and shot him twice in the head, executing him. Another factor that happened in the midst of all this that also factored in as to why these two probably had trouble seeing where Platt was and all that is at least twice in the midst of this gunfight, two civilian vehicles just drove through. I'm not kidding. This doesn't really do it justice because, like, I'm making everything purposefully big so that you can see it on a diagram, but, like, you can see in a picture how there was, like, excess road over to the left. In the middle of the gunfight with bullets flying, with people literally lying dead in the street, like, they're no self-awareness. Like, I have to get to work on time. Yeah, so that was happening. And probably partially contributed to the reason that they lost track of Platt in the midst of all this. A couple minutes have passed now since the gunfight had started, and Morellis was starting to come to his senses. So at this point, Morellis was still over here kind of at the back of McNeil's vehicle, and he saw Platt standing over here in the midst of the carnage, and Morellis didn't know who was alive, who was dead. He just saw Platt and knew the score probably wasn't great for these guys. So Morales took his shotgun and he laid it on the ground underneath McNeil's vehicle and fired it one-handed. And it turns out that the buckshot he fired out of the shotgun hit Platt in both of his feet. However, Platt, who has now been hit at least 7 times, if not 8 times at this point, flinches a little bit and just keeps walking. Morales, to get a better view, crawls around more to the front of McNeil's vehicle and notices that not only is Platt at the car now, but Maddox is as well. And as a matter of fact, Maddox is sitting in the passenger seat of the car as Platt has moved to sit in the car himself. And Morales puts 2 and 2 together and figures out, oh, they're trying to drive away. Because think about it, Platt and Maddox can't run on foot, especially not when they're bleeding out and there's cops everywhere. This car's too far away, and they can't get to these cars because of these two. So the only car that still has a way to get out is Ben Grogan's car. And even though Hanlon is still alive on the ground, he probably wouldn't be if Platt manages to start it up and back the car over him, which would be the only way he could get out of here. Morales realizes that he has to do something. And even though he only has one hand and a 2-handed shotgun, he makes it work. Morales lays up against the back of McNeil's vehicle and puts the buttstock of the gun between his legs, grabs the pump, and racks it before switching to lay the shotgun over the back of McNeil's car, fires, and then repeats the process again, firing 5 rounds at the vehicle until the shotgun's empty. Now, while he was shooting out the window and it seems debris were hitting the 2 men, none of the buckshot rounds made enough contact to do any real damage. In response to this, Platt steps out of the vehicle and fires 3 shots at Morales. All of the rounds hit around Morales and some fragments make contact with him, but Platt doesn't land any direct hits. At the same time this is happening, a couple of off-duty police officers heard the commotion and show up to help. And one of them comes over to help out McNeil. And as they're dragging him away, they don't know who anyone is. And none of the FBI agents are wearing uniform because they were all plainclothes. So the guy dragging away McNeil asks if Morales is a good guy or a bad guy. And through the delirium, McNeil says he's a good guy. The reason that the agent dragging McNeil asks that is because Morales was having a one-man war. Now, the way Morales tells this is very foggy. Like, he didn't know what was going on, that he was kind of in a daze, couldn't see straight, was about to lose consciousness. Everyone else describes that Morales was on a warpath. He was laying next to the car, bleeding out of his head, literally shooting blood out of his head. His left arm looked completely gone, and he was screaming, swearing, saying, "I'm going to kill you, I'm going to rip you apart, I'm going to tear you to pieces." And these guys still can't see what's going on. They just see Morales screaming. This off-duty cop shows up at the scene, has no idea who this crazy guy is shouting about killing people, but McNeil says he's cool, so they let it fly. Morales even mentioned later that if he had just looked over and saw 2 people who he didn't know were police officers carrying McNeil off, he probably would have shot them too. Morales says that in this moment, he realized he was going to die. He had lost so much blood that he was on the brink of passing out. He didn't know how bad the injury to his head was. For all he knew, his brains were falling out. So Morales knew that he was going to die. And in the last seconds of life that he had left, he decided that he is taking Platt and Maddox with him. This is perfect timing because at this point, Maddox has been hit in enough arteries that he is becoming very groggy and starting to come out of it. And despite all of Platt's rage and this murder tirade he went on, it seems he is getting a bit more sluggish as well. And especially because Platt thinks that he just took care of Morales, now's the perfect time. So Morales stands up, pulls his revolver, and aims a shot directly at Maddox. He fires, and it seems to be a miss. So Morales says to himself, "Oh, I just have to walk closer." So just in the open, he fires again about 8 yards from the car. The shot hits Platt in the forehead. Although the round was deflected and it just grazed him, it was enough to visibly watch Platt jerk back in the vehicle. Morales keeps walking. The second shot hits Maddox in the face. Again, a deflection. So he walks and fires again. The next shot hits Maddox in the face. He walks and fires again. The next shot hit Maddox in the face, this one going through his skull, killing him. Finally, with one bullet left, he walks all the way up to the front of the car, leans his hand through the passenger window that's broken, puts the barrel square against Platt's chest, and fires. The force of the round instantly driving Platt to unconsciousness, to which he would be dead mere seconds later. Gilbert and Ron, seeing what had happened, run over to Morales, telling him that it's over, that he got it, and Morales, after all his years of FBI training, takes his revolver, puts it in his holster, and shuts the latch. In the midst of the gunfight, even Gilbert was hit by a fractured round, meaning Ron was the only person in this entire scenario who wasn't hit by gunfire. And according to the coroner's report, Maddox was hit at least 6 times and Platt was hit at least 12. Thankfully, McNeil's paralysis was only temporary. While he did suffer damage to his spine, he was able to walk again. Other than Dove and Grogan, all the FBI agents survived. And with the bullet that killed Platt and the symbolic holstering of Morales' revolver, the shootout ended at 9:40 a.m. after just 5 minutes. In those 5 minutes, direct estimates aren't known because of the helicopters that landed and all of the EMS crews that came in, but based on shell casings, anywhere from 140 to 150 rounds were fired. And considering that out of 10 people, 9 had to seek medical aid, the situation had a 90% casualty rate. It's easy to see why this is a situation that changed the FBI and law enforcement forever, and with good reason. With this, the murderous rage of Platt and Maddox finally came to an end, but it extracted a heavy toll as Grogan and Dove lay dead with them. Near the end of the shootout, there were hundreds of responders from EMS, fire, and police crews around the area, and as soon as it was declared safe, they immediately rushed in and began providing aid. Miraculously, Morales would actually not lose his left arm. It would take years of surgery and therapy to get there, but eventually he regained the use of his left arm. Because of his spinal damage, McNeil would suffer pretty persistent pain throughout the rest of his life, and quite tragically would die in 2004 of esophageal cancer. Quite tragically, he might have known about the cancer earlier had the spot the tumor developed in not been the same area that he was already experiencing back pain, so he didn't recognize it until it was too late. Tragically, the DMV inquiry that Grogan had made previously, if you'll remember when he had the agents drive around and collect the license plate numbers of various F-150 trucks, tragically, that report was waiting on his desk on the morning of April the 11th. And it turns out in that report that one of the license plates that Agent Hanlon had written down, just by coincidence, was Maddox's white Ford F-150. So who knows if that would have changed anything, right? Who knows if they would have found that picture and passed that along to Jose to confirm that this was their guy or not? Who knows if that would have changed anything, if it could have changed anything. But it might have. And it was tragic that Grogan would never make his way back to that desk again. And despite only one of the officers, Ron Reisner, not being injured that day, everyone made a full recovery. The events of that day have been and will continue to be debated probably forever. This caused massive re-evaluation of FBI equipment and procedures. And one of the most talked about points from all of this is the shot Jerry Dove took that went into the lung of Platt. An autopsy would later confirm that when that bullet went into Platt's lung, for all intents and purposes, Platt was dead. Blood was rapidly filling up inside of his lung, and realistically, he had maybe 6-7 minutes to live before he killed over. As a matter of fact, a blood trail analysis would theorize that Platt lost up to half of the blood in his body before he actually died. So this caused a really big debate within law enforcement. How dead is dead enough? Because even if that shot effectively killed him, keep in mind, no one was dead when that shot was fired, meaning the dead man had enough time to kill 2 agents. This has led to years of debates in research and development departments. How do we make a bullet that effectively eliminates a threat? How much stopping power can we realistically put into a bullet? The years of development that would follow this would lead to the production of the .40 Smith & Wesson cartridge, which to this day, to my knowledge, is still the primary round used by pretty much every law enforcement agency in the United States. Comparing that to the 9mm round, it's not a ton of difference, but enough to justify however many billions of dollars we spent on this. According to the FBI, the ballistic difference was pertinent enough that it required the United States switch over to it. And I'll leave the particulars about stopping power and what bullet's more effective and which bullet's the best for self-defense and blah, blah, blah. I'll leave that up to people who care far more than I do. But all I'll say that from the reading I know, and as this story should show, the best bullet to stop someone is another bullet. In most cases, if a shooting goes well, you never hear about it. Everything did the job that it was supposed to. But if a shooting goes wrong, then there needs to be a problem, regardless if the problem exists or not. I think it's very apparent at like 5 different points in this story that just because you think someone is dead doesn't mean they actually are. And where that was especially apparent is with all of the revolvers that the FBI had to use during the shootout. There was already a push happening to begin to give officers auto-loading pistols that worked off of magazines instead of old school, more traditional revolvers. And this was the kick in the pants to make that the standard. And from this, there was no department that began to continue to issue revolvers when things that could have 3-4 times the ammunition capacity were just as easy to carry. This changed officer training and how they conduct their drills. It changed like officers' requirements to wear body armor, the requirements around body armor itself. If there is a modern standard when it comes to use of force in law enforcement, it probably tracks its way back to the Miami shootout in some way. There was even pushback on the legal side through this. For a while, the Florida State Prosecutor's Office was threatening to file charges on Morales for excessive force, saying his final shots at point-blank range were unjustified. But I think given everything else we've seen in this case, I wouldn't be convinced these guys were dead unless they blew up. But eventually that matter was dropped, and all of the government reaction to this case was nothing but in favor of the agents involved. The FBI created the Medal of Valor to award Morales, and himself, as well as the agents who were killed, had buildings within the FBI's institution named after them, which eventually all of the agents who were there that day were given the Medal of Valor. The FBI would use this event for training in years to come, and even produced a educational documentary / informational video called Firefight, where they reenacted a lot of the events and had Morales provide like talking head interview segments for it. And it's really funny because this was years after the shootout. So Morales was working undercover at the time, so he couldn't show his face during the talking head segments. So anytime it cuts to him, it looks like he's about to be executed because he has to hide his face, and it looks like he's about to die. It seems that after this event, Morales would go on to live a very fruitful and thorough life, not only within the realms of the FBI in doing things like giving educational briefs about what happened during the shootout or becoming an instructor in like firearms training, but he also just became an advocate for things like PTSD and other like psychological or physical problems he suffered with afterwards, and became a big talking point for agents and soldiers, police officers, whatever, who experience this kind of thing, saying that it's okay to not be okay all the time. Also, shortly after the shooting, while Morales was still in the hospital, he found out that his wife, who was also an agent, was expecting their first child. And from there, they've had several more, and it seems that Morales has made the most of the time that, against all odds, he was given. In a segment taken from the end of his book, Ed Morales says, John 15:13 says, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." When a person lays down their life to save yours, you should not squander your life. The best way to honor the person who died for you is to live your life to the fullest, not to squander it. I have tried to do that. There were a lot of things that went wrong in the Miami shootout, either that be unpreparedness or either that be just the ferocity of Platt and Maddox in their final moments. But one thing that did not go wrong was the bravery of the agents who were there that day. I talk a lot about the FBI on this channel. I talk a lot about problems I have with things certain agents have done or the institution as a whole. But in this moment, it was people who saw something that needed to be stopped and were willing to put their life on the line to stop it. Even the guy who didn't have a gun, and even that guy tried to do something about it, you know, after he used his car and body to stop the robbers. Other than that guy, there was never a moment where people made progress away from the danger. The whole time, it was them closing them. It was them making sure that if anyone got hurt, it was going to be them. And who knows what would have happened if they would have let the bandits get away, if their crime spree continued. How many more bodies would be added to the list? It's an interesting case because of how bizarre it is. If you start at Platt and Maddox's wife, the case goes on for several years, right? And it's interesting to see the evil around it, but something that stands out so much to me is just the valor of the people in question. And in the midst of all the terrible and in the midst of all the depressing, there's no upside stories I like to cover. It's cool every now and then to get to see a moment like that, where people are who you want them to be. And I think that's pretty neat. And if you thought it was pretty neat, and if you gained any information from this video at all, which would be surprising, then I certainly appreciate it. And I just want to say thank you for watching. The Miami-Dade shootout has always been kind of an infamous story in the realm of law enforcement. And like growing up as someone who was into firearms, it got talked about all the time when it came to like stopping power. People would say that like 9mm was a stupid round because of what happened in the 1986 shootout, implying that ammo has not developed at all since 1986, but whatever. It's just always been a story I've been interested in, so it was fun to go down the rabbit hole, learn the specifics, and learn why this story has the reputation it does, which I think is well earned. But hopefully you enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for the support on everything. Merry Christmas, by the way. I'm recording this a little after Christmas, or at least this part of it a little after Christmas. And Happy New Year's. I appreciate you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I had a video that I wanted to release before year's end, but I got halfway through it and it was already like 2-3 hours. So that one's gonna have to be a January upload, I think. Hopefully, we'll see. But yeah, I know a lot of the uploads lately have been kind of shorter. I know that I haven't been my very best for you, so to speak. But hopefully this was a good one, and hopefully I can get back into the swing of the ridiculously long uploads that torture me, but you guys love to watch for some reason. But no, really, thank you all for the support. It means the world. Thank you for the support on everything on the charity and whatnot. I think there's still a few days left to get in on the charity merch, all the profits of which go to the ARP, which I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing about at this point. I think there's a couple days to get in on that if you want. But thank you all so much for the support you've shown thus far. That should do it for now, but I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!